It's a very good morning to Pamela Rakovsky, OAM. Thanks for coming in, Pamela.
Yes, good morning, Ali.
Now, you are giving a talk in History Month. In fact, it's been so popular you're going to do a few more of them, about Afghan Cameleer Herbalist.
Yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Excellent thing to be interested in.
Certainly.
Okay, where do we start with Afghan Cameleer Herbalist and South Australia?
I've been studying the history of the Afghan Cameleer since 1980, and my first book came out in 1987. But every now and then someone comes up to me and asks me about Muhammad Alam, probably the most famous herbalist in Australia, in Bombay, in Karachi, in Calcutta, in Fremantle. He was admired and wanted so much in these capital cities across our continents. But I kept saying to people, well, he wasn't the only Afghan. That was my thinking, because I know of other Afghan leaders like Faizan Tag Muhammad, Abdul Wade. So in the end, though, I just became obsessed, because that's what a passion is about, isn't it, really? Being obsessed by a distraction. And then you have to know the answers yourself before you can share them with anybody else. So I started to research Muhammad Alam by going to the Adelaide archives. And then I said to myself, well, he couldn't have been the only Afghan herbalist, surely. So then I started researching into who were the other Afghan Cameleer herbalists that resided in southwest Adelaide area. And I found that quite a few of them were in rooms, consulting rooms along Guja Street.
Yeah, right. So can we just take a step back? How and why did these Afghan Cameleers end up in South Australia and then in the southwest corner of the city?
Well, we have to give credit to South Australia. It was Thomas Elder who had the amazing, innovative concept or vision to make this colony survive economically. We had to deal with the arid interior, which is half the geographical area of the state. So he bought camels here, and they served the pastoral properties in the far north, 1860s, 1870s. And then we had the railway line that came through called the Great Northern Railway Line, or also known as the GAN. And they were employed to work on that. And then they would go up to Maree and set up an Elder Smith base there, and then they would service the Birdsville track, the Strzelecki track, the Unadada track. But after the 1880s, the railway line ironically meant the end of some of the camel strings. So suddenly there was all these old Afghans who didn't speak much English who became destitute and unemployed. They had 3-year contracts to go back to India, mainly northwest India, but nobody was going to honour paying that fee. So they ended up being destitute. And the only way to get back home was to move out of the outback down to Port Adelaide. And some of them started to settle around Port Adelaide or in the city area and convert to hawking as another alternative income.
Okay. And so then into the southwest corner?
Yeah, that's what fascinates me. Why not southeast? Why not northwest Adelaide? By 1890, 2 other famous Afghan Cameleers, Faizan Tag Muhammad, saw the need to look after these old men. And they chose a piece of land that was like in the cheaper part of Adelaide, which was southwest Adelaide at the time. Land was very swampy there. Even the cemetery there, the Adelaide West Terrace Cemetery, slopes westward downhill. So there's a lot of water underground, and the rates were cheap. Hawking meant that people could go up to the wonderful old markets on North Terrace, buy their horses for their vans. They would, at Ramadan, they would have to get sheep, and they would slaughter sheep or cattle as part of the celebrations after. So there was a reason for a proximity to southwest Adelaide. And I reveal this in my walk when I talk about why that part of southwest Adelaide. And then eventually they built the first permanent mosque in Australia in 1890. So that became a real focus point for the old men who could not go back home.
Our Monday's expert on ABC Radio Adelaide is Pamela Rakovsky, and she is an expert in Afghan Cameleer Herbalist, which is just so brilliant to say, really.
Yes.
So Muhammad Alam, he is, well, I've got a little bit of inside knowledge to him, actually, because I ended up living in his house and so did a little bit of research in it. But he was a character. And in fact, when I say I did research, people would stop outside the house and I would walk out and then they would tell me the history behind it all. But tell me a little bit about him.
Well, I want to say he's not the only one, but in my research, I have found him to be really a fascinating character. A historian wants to be telling stories based on evidence, but I must give something to that man. He had something about him where he drew hundreds of thousands of Australians just to his business, his consulting rooms in Sturt Street. For example, it got to the point where there'd be 600 people a day waiting outside his door to see him. So the police had to come along and move the crowds. But I was told by people that when he saw you and you sat down in front of him and he looked at you and then took your hand, either to say welcome, somehow he could almost diagnose what was wrong with you. For example, there was, and I meet people on my walks who tell me they used to go to Muhammad Alam when they were little. So I'm trying to think how old people are, because Muhammad Alam was actually in his office from 1928 to 53 when he wanted to go home to retire. But for example, there was a little boy that came in twitching his head quite significantly, and the doctors could not heal him. And Muhammad Alam looked at this little boy, pulled over his little lamp or candle, held it to the ear of this little boy, got tweezers and pulled out a little insect. And all that time, that had been the cause of this boy's distress. And the doctors could not heal him.
Well, how were these herbalists viewed by, I don't want to say the rest of society, but they're offering an alternative fix?
Yeah, and I look at that too. The General Practitioners Act came into existence in 1919. So now you have professional doctors wanting to protect their reputations. And they had to deal with other people setting them up as botanic healers. Now, but botanic healing goes right back for thousands of years. I mean, the ancient Greeks did it, the ancient Romans did it, the ancient Egyptians did it, and people who come from poorer countries like China and people from Cornwall all believed in alternative healing. And remember, this is after World War I, where a lot of people are fairly poor, and to pay the price of a doctor might be a deterrent or make you want to think twice about how you may get healed. And the Afghan herbalists were not just present in Adelaide, they were in towns like Ballarat, Broken Hill. So they were accessible to people, and they always would say in their adverts that they don't charge anything. So that was a big enticement after World War I and during the Great Depression.
Well, hang on. How did they make money then?
Well, this is what I am trying to work out without putting anyone's reputation in a unsatisfying view. Muhammad Alam was quite wealthy from what I understand, but he served a lot of people that were in the high echelons of our society, wealthy families, very influential leaders in our community. And even though he said, I won't charge you anything, there was a great sense of gratitude. For example, when I go past his house even now, my mind goes back to the days when people left him bowls of fruit, big bouquets of flowers and other gifts. And I get the understanding that some people did give monetary donations to his charity works.
One of our texters wants to know whether or not you know of anyone called Croppo Singh, a cameleer in South Australia, apparently the first customer of the Savings Bank of SA.
Yes, I've heard that story. Yeah, now that's interesting. The Afghans themselves were mainly Mohammedan, but some were also Indian, Hindu or Sikh. And Croppo Singh was an early cameleer who did invest his money in the bank, and he is well known for that particular event when he did donate, when he became a borrower with the Savings Bank.
So where did they go? I mean, you said that Muhammad Alam wanted to go home. They still...
Yeah, a lot of the Afghans that were practicing along Gurja Street, which is quite fascinating because it's very multicultural now down Gurja Street, a lot of them stayed in Adelaide and were partners in businesses because Afghan cameleers here came under the understanding they had to go home every 3 years. So when they became practicing herbalists, they would go home every 3 years, and that's where they gathered some of their dried herbs and brought them back to Adelaide. So, for example, they might bring senna pods back or senna leaves back. And some people out there may remember their mums giving them senna tea. My mum did. But I think in the 1920s, by the 1930s, when Muhammad is very well established, a lot of the other Afghan cameleers have already moved interstate. And I'm not too sure. They were very mobile, these herbalists, and partly because they did have to go back to India to re-enter Australia under the terms of immigration, under the terms of the Immigration Restriction Act of 1901. So they would come and go, and then some of them moved down to Port Adelaide, and I think that's because where a lot of their herbs were imported, they went and practiced down there. So they were fairly mobile. They didn't all stay, and except for Muhammad Alam, who was a great exception. A lot of them moved after 2 or 3 years and went to another town.
Ian from Milo has something quite incredible. His text says, I have Muhammad Alam's walking cane. It's made of animal horn, has 7 solid gold ferrules. Is that right? And I don't know if I've got that right. Apologies, Ian. And the inscription is, as a token of appreciation from Angelo de Medina in 1932. It was made by butlers in Adelaide and hallmarked by Wentz. So it sounds like quite incredible.
So he has, that actually is Muhammad Alam's walking cane. Is that what the gentleman is saying?
Yeah. So a token of appreciation.
Yeah. The date makes sense to me because Muhammad Alam was based in Sturt Street by 1928. And so by 1932, he already had hundreds of people visiting him at his consulting rooms at that address. And he did have a lot to do with foldings, because he got a lot of his chemicals came from there, his dry ingredients that he compounded together. I think Menzies' factory wasn't that far away. So people do remember him walking around the streets, and he did have a walking cane, and he did walk the streets with a long flowing robe over his clothes, and he had a turban on. So it's very likely that he would have made such an impression on people that they wanted to donate things to him.
And he was a rather virile man, wasn't he? That's one of the things I was always. He had a lot of children and had some
not a lot
late,
of children. I think
late.
it's the age he had his child at. Yes, he did get married in Adelaide to a young girl who came in, and she had a hand condition. And when he touched her hand, something happened, because that's the girl he chose to marry. Now, he was nearly 90 when he married her, and she was 19, going on 20.
He was 19, she was 19.
He was 90.
Yeah, and she was 19.
And I think the media didn't know how to present that story. They thought it was a great act of love, because he actually married her, I believe, in the mosque, and then they had a civil wedding, and then they had a little girl. So at the age of 90, he became a father. And so the newspapers did pick up on the story and suggested that maybe it really wasn't his child. But if you look at his beautiful little daughter, she looks like her father. Yeah. So it was an amazing romance story in Adelaide at the time.
Well, Pamela Rakovsky, thank you very much for being our Monday's expert. Now, as you said, you already have done this tour, walking tour, exhibition and lecture, but it was so popular that people want more. So you're doing one on the Saturday the 3rd of June, Saturday the 1st of July. It's all based at the Southwest Community Centre, which is there on Sturt Street, Adelaide, just down from the house that we've been talking about. So if you want more information, I guess you can go to either to History Week or also go to Sturt Street. You can also call us here now on 1300 222 891. Pamela, thank you.
Thank you.